That Sunday dinner, when my father-in-law humiliated me in front of the whole family, I never imagined I was about to uncover the secret they had been hiding for decades. As I quietly cleared the dishes, feeling the weight of those cruel words, I had no idea that in the attic of that very house were documents that would change everything forever. I never thought a dinner conversation would destroy everything I believed about my family, until my father-in-law looked me dead in the eye and told me I didn't deserve to breathe the same air as his late wife. The words hit me like a physical blow across that mahogany dining table where we'd shared countless Sunday meals over the past 15 years. My fork clattered against the china plate, the sound echoing in the sudden silence that followed his venomous declaration. My husband David sat frozen beside me, his face pale as winter snow, while his younger sister Sarah stared at her hands like they held the secrets of the universe. "Excuse me?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible above the grandfather clock's relentless ticking in the corner. Robert Whitmore, the man I'd called Dad for over a decade, leaned back in his leather chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd finally spoken their truth. His gray eyes, once kind when they looked at me, now held nothing but cold disdain. "You heard me, Claire. My Margaret is barely cold in the ground, and here you are, acting like you own the place." My chest tightened. Acting like I owned the place? I'd been helping with Margaret's care for months before she passed, sleeping in that uncomfortable hospital chair, holding her hand through countless treatments, being the daughter she'd never had. The daughter she'd told me I was, over and over, in those final weeks when morphine made her voice soft, but her love crystal clear. "Robert, what are you talking about?" I finally found my voice, though it shook like autumn leaves. "I loved Margaret. We all did. I don't understand why you're—" "Don't!" His palm slammed against the table, making the wine glasses jump. "Don't you dare stand there and pretend you cared about anything other than what you could get from her." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, toxic and suffocating. David's hand found mine under the table, his fingers cold and trembling. I looked at him, searching his face for some explanation, some clue about what had possessed his father to attack me with such cruelty. But David's eyes were fixed on his plate, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. "What exactly do you think I'm getting from Margaret's death?" I asked, my voice gaining strength from pure bewilderment. "Grief? Sleepless nights? The empty feeling every time I pass her favorite coffee shop?" Robert's laugh was bitter as black coffee. "Cut the act, Claire. We both know why you spent so much time with her these past few months. Why you were always so eager to drive her to appointments, to sit with her, to be her little helper." Sarah finally looked up, her young face twisted with confusion. "Dad, what are you saying? Claire was amazing with Mom. She did more for her than any of us." "She did what she needed to do," Robert snapped, his attention briefly shifting to his daughter before returning to me like a laser. What she had to do to secure her position. The room felt like it was shrinking around me. Each breath became harder to draw, as if the air itself had thickened into something unbreathable. 15 years of family dinners, birthday celebrations, Christmas mornings, and lazy summer barbecues flashed through my mind. 15 years of Robert calling me his daughter, hugging me hello and goodbye, asking about my work at the elementary school, bringing me soup when I was sick. "Robert," I said slowly, carefully, like I was talking to one of my second graders. "During a meltdown, I think you're grieving, and grief makes people say things they don't mean. Margaret just died 3 weeks ago. We're all struggling to—" "Don't you dare psychoanalyze me." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I know exactly what I'm saying, and I know exactly what kind of person you are. Margaret might have been fooled by your sweet little schoolteacher act, but I see right through you." The words felt like ice water in my veins. Sweet little schoolteacher act. As if caring for children, as if dedicating my life to education, as if every genuine emotion I'd ever shown was just performance. as if the love I'd felt for his wife, the woman who'd welcomed me into this family when I was just 23, years old and scared of everything, was nothing more than calculated manipulation. "I don't understand what's happening here," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay calm. "Margaret was like a mother to me. She was gullible," Robert cut me off. "She was lonely after her first heart attack, and you swooped in like a vulture, didn't you? Playing the perfect daughter-in-law, the caring nursemaid, the devoted companion." David's grip on my hand tightened painfully, but he still hadn't spoken. Not one word in my defense, not one objection to his father's character assassination. The silence from my husband hurt worse than Robert's accusations, because David knew me. He knew my heart, my intentions, my genuine love for his mother. "Say something," I whispered to David, but he remained statue still. "He doesn't need to." "Say anything," Robert continued, clearly enjoying the power he held over this moment. "He knows the truth just like I do. We've talked about it, haven't we, son?" My blood turned to ice. They'd talked about it, about me, about my supposed ulterior motives, about the purity of my grief, the legitimacy of my love for Margaret, the sincerity of everything I'd given to this family. "Talked about what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Robert smiled, and it was the cruelest expression I'd ever seen on his weathered face. "About how convenient it was that you became so indispensable to Margaret right around the time she started talking about updating her will. The bottom dropped out of my world. Will. Margaret had mentioned something about paperwork, about wanting to make sure everyone was taken care of, but I'd barely listened. I was focused on her comfort, on making sure she wasn't in pain, on helping her maintain some dignity while cancer stole everything else. I started, but Robert held up his hand. "Save it. I don't want to hear your denials. I just want you to know that I'm watching you, Claire. Every move you make from now on, I'm watching. And if you think you're going to waltz away with anything that rightfully belongs to this family, you're more deluded than I thought." The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah looked between her father and me with wide, frightened eyes, clearly as lost as I was. David continued his impression of a marble statue, offering no comfort, no explanation, no defense. "I need some air," I whispered, pushing back from the table on unsteady legs. "Take all the air you want," Robert called after me as I stumbled toward the front door. "Just remember what I said." I burst onto the front porch of the house where I'd spent countless happy hours, where I'd felt safe and loved and welcomed for 15 years, and doubled over like I'd been punched in the stomach. The October air was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere I'd just escaped. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, who might help me make sense of what had just happened. But who could I call? My own parents had passed away years ago. Margaret had been my closest confidant, the person I turned to when life felt overwhelming. My few close friends were more acquaintances, really. Fellow teachers who knew me as the quiet, dedicated one who preferred grading papers to happy hour drama. The front door opened behind me, and I turned, hoping to see David coming to comfort me, to explain what madness had possessed his father. Instead, Sarah stepped onto the porch, her young face streaked with tears. "Claire, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I don't know what's gotten into Dad. He's been different since Mom died. Angry about everything, suspicious of everyone." "Different how?" I asked, grasping for anything that might explain the evening's events. Sarah glanced back at the house, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "He's been going through Mom's things obsessively, staying up all night reading old papers, making phone calls to lawyers. Yesterday I heard him yelling at someone on the phone about protecting what's mine. Lawyers, papers. The pieces of some puzzle I didn't understand were starting to form a shape I couldn't quite see yet. Sarah, did your mother ever mention anything to you about her will? About making changes? The girl's face went even paler. She mentioned something a few weeks before she died. Something about wanting to make sure you were taken care of because you'd been so good to her. But I thought she meant like emotionally taken care of. I never thought about money or property or anything like that. The front door opened again, and David finally appeared, his face haggard in the porch light. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and muttered something about needing to check on the dishes before disappearing back inside, leaving my husband and me alone under the star-scattered sky. David, I began, but he held up his hand just like his father had done. Don't, Claire, just don't. Don't what? Don't ask why you sat there in silence while your father accused me of manipulating your dying mother. Don't ask why you let him threaten me like I'm some kind of criminal. Don't ask why the man I married, who promised to love and protect me, just watched his father tear me apart without saying one word in my defense. David's shoulders sagged like he was carrying the weight of the entire world. When he looked at me, his eyes were filled with something I'd never seen there before. Doubt. I don't know what to believe anymore, he admitted in a voice so quiet I had to strain to hear it. Dad's been showing me things, documents, dates, connections. He's convinced that you've been planning something for months. Planning what exactly? I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Planning to what, David? Steal. Your mother's jewelry? Empty her bank account? What exactly does your father think I'm capable of? David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times during our marriage whenever he felt overwhelmed. But this time, instead of reaching out to me for comfort like he always had before, he took a step backward. I need time to think, he said. I need to figure out what's real and what's not. What's real is that I loved your mother, I said, fiercely. What's real is that I held her hand while she was dying and promised her I'd help keep this family together. What's real is that I've never asked for anything from anyone in this family except to be loved and accepted. What's real is that I'm your wife, David, and you're supposed to trust me. I want to, he whispered. God, Claire, I want to trust you. But there are things you don't know, things that happened before tonight, conversations I've had with Dad that make me question everything. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Not just Robert's attack, but David's willingness to believe it, to entertain the possibility that everything about our marriage, about my character, about my love for his family, was built on lies and manipulation. What conversations? I pressed, stepping closer to him. David backed away again, and the distance between us felt like an ocean. I can't do this tonight, Claire. I can't have this conversation when everything feels so raw and confusing. I think you should stay at your sister's for a few days while we all figure this out. Stay at my sister's. Like I was the problem. Like I was the threat that needed to be managed and contained. Like 15 years of marriage meant nothing when stacked against his father's paranoid accusations. Fine, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded when my world was crumbling around me. I'll pack a bag. I drove to my sister Jenny's, apartment in a daze, my mind replaying every moment of the evening like a film reel stuck on repeat. The way Robert's voice had dripped with disdain. The way Sarah's eyes had filled with confusion and fear. The way David had sat there like a stranger, letting his father eviscerate the woman he'd promised to love for better or worse. Jenny took one look at my face when I appeared at her door at nearly midnight and pulled me inside without questions. She wrapped me in her robe, made tea I couldn't taste, and listened while I tried to make sense of the evening's events through tears that wouldn't stop coming. It doesn't make sense, I kept repeating. None of it makes sense. Why would Robert think I was manipulating Margaret? Why would David believe him? What will? What documents? I don't understand any of it. Jenny held me like I was still the scared little girl who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. "We'll figure it out tomorrow," she promised. "When the shock wears off and you can think clearly, we'll figure out what's really going on." But lying in Jenny's guest bed that night, staring at the ceiling while my marriage and family dissolved around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that figuring it out was going to be harder than anyone imagined. Because somewhere in the space between Robert's accusations and David's doubt, there was a truth I didn't know yet. A truth that someone was working very hard to keep hidden. The next morning brought no relief, only the harsh reality that yesterday's nightmare was today's truth. I called in sick to school, something I'd done maybe 3 times in my entire career, and sat at Jenny's kitchen table trying to make sense of fragments that didn't fit together. Margaret had mentioned updating her will. Robert was convinced I'd manipulated her into it somehow. David had been having secret conversations with his father about me, about documents, about connections I didn't understand. Sarah had overhead phone calls to lawyers about protecting what's mine. And somewhere in that tangle of partial information was an accusation so devastating that it had turned my husband against me and shattered 15 years of family bonds in a single evening. I needed answers. I needed to understand what Robert thought he knew and where his information was coming from. Because until I knew what I was fighting, I couldn't defend myself. And I was definitely going to fight. Because whatever game Robert Whitmore thought he was playing, whatever truth he thought he'd discovered about me, he was wrong. Dead wrong. And I was going to prove it. 3 days of silence from David felt like 3 years of torture. But on Thursday morning, something unexpected happened that changed everything. Mrs. Henderson from next door to the Whitmore house called me at Jenny's apartment, her elderly voice trembling with urgency. "Claire, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I have something that belonged to Margaret, and I think you should have it before anyone else knows about it." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What kind of something, Mrs. Henderson?" "Can you meet me at the old coffee shop on Maple Street in an hour? The one Margaret loved so much. I don't want to discuss this over the phone." I arrived at Margaret's favorite coffee shop with my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the door handle. Mrs. Henderson sat in the corner booth where Margaret used to grade her book club assignments, a manila envelope clutched against her chest like a shield. "Margaret gave this to me 2 weeks before she passed," Mrs. Henderson whispered, sliding the envelope across the scratched wooden table. "She made me promise to give it to you if anything strange happened after she was gone. She said if Robert started acting suspicious or hostile toward you, I should make sure you got this immediately." The envelope was thick, heavy with papers, and my name was written across the front in Margaret's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I broke the seal, and what I found inside made my blood run cold. Copies of legal documents. A will dated just 3 weeks before Margaret's death, property deeds, bank statements, and a handwritten letter that began with words that made my vision blur. "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, then Robert has already begun his campaign to destroy you, and you need to know the truth about what I've done and why." I looked up at Mrs. Henderson, who was watching me with kind but worried eyes. "Did you read this?" She shook her head. Margaret asked me not to, and I respected her wishes. But she did tell me that Robert had been pressuring her for months to change her will back to the way it was before, and she was afraid of what he might do when he discovered she'd refused. My hands shook as I unfolded Margaret's letter, written in the careful script I'd seen on countless birthday cards and Christmas notes over the years. But this letter was different. This letter was urgent, desperate, filled with secrets that made my entire world tilt sideways. "Claire," the letter began, "I need you to understand that everything I'm about to tell you is true, even though it will be hard to believe. Robert is not the man you think he is, and David doesn't know the whole truth about his father or his family. I stopped reading and looked around the coffee shop, suddenly paranoid that someone might be watching me. Mrs. Henderson reached across the table and patted my hand. "Take your time, dear. I'll sit here as long as you need." I returned to the letter, my heart pounding harder with each sentence. 3 months ago, I discovered that Robert has been systematically hiding money from our family for years. Not just small amounts, significant sums that should have been shared with David and Sarah. When I confronted him about it, he became violent for the first time in our 40-year marriage. He didn't hit me, but he grabbed my arms hard enough to leave bruises and told me that if I ever mentioned the money again, he would make sure David knew about your real reasons for marrying him. My breath caught in my throat. Real reasons for marrying David? What could Robert possibly think he knew about my motivations that even Margaret had heard about? The letter continued. I realized then that Robert had been poisoning David against you slowly, planting seeds of doubt about your intentions, your character, your love for our family. He's been preparing David to believe the worst about you, so that when the time came, he could turn my son against his own wife to protect his secrets. I felt sick. All those times in recent months when David had seemed distant, when he'd asked strange questions about my past, when he'd watched me, with Margaret like he was looking for something suspicious. It hadn't been grief or stress. It had been his father's influence, working like a slow poison in his mind. The money Robert has been hiding comes from a source he's ashamed of, Margaret's letter continued. And I've included documentation that proves everything I'm about to tell you. Robert's father, David's grandfather, was not the upstanding businessman everyone believed him to be. He was involved in illegal activities during the 1960s and 1970s, and when he died, he left behind a substantial amount of money that Robert has been living off of for decades while pretending to be a self-made success. I looked up at Mrs. Henderson again. "How long did you know Margaret?" 53 years, she replied softly. "Since we were both young mothers. She was the most honest person I ever knew, Claire. If she wrote something down, you can believe it's true." I returned to the letter with growing dread. "I've left the house to you, Claire, along with most of my personal assets, because I know you're the only person who will use them properly. Not because David doesn't deserve them, but because Robert controls David financially and emotionally, and anything I leave to my son will ultimately end up in Robert's hands." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm, too exposed. I was inheriting Margaret's house, the house where I'd just been accused of manipulation and greed. The house where Robert lived, where David had grown up, where 15 years of family memories were stored in every room. "But the most important thing I need you to know," the letter continued, "is that Robert has been forging documents to make it appear that you influenced me to change my will. He's created fake emails, false witness statements, and even altered some of my medical records to suggest that I was mentally compromised when I made my final legal decisions. He's been planning to contest the will and destroy your reputation in the process." My vision blurred as the full scope of Robert's manipulation became clear. This wasn't just about greed or family conflict. This was a calculated campaign to frame me for elder abuse, to paint me as a predator who had taken advantage of a dying woman. "Mrs. Henderson," I whispered, "Margaret said something about Robert, acting hostile toward me. Has he already started?" The elderly woman's face darkened. "Oh, honey, he started the day after the funeral. He's been telling anyone who will listen that you manipulated Margaret, that you isolated her from her family, that you convinced her to change her will while she was on pain medication. Half the neighborhood thinks you're some kind of monster." I felt like I was drowning in quicksand, sinking deeper with every breath. "What about David? Does he believe it?" Mrs. Henderson's silence was answer enough. I forced myself to finish, reading Margaret's letter, though each word felt like a knife wound. "I've also discovered that Robert has been in contact with a lawyer who specializes in elder abuse cases, not to protect elderly people, but to help families contest wills by proving undue influence. This lawyer has been coaching Robert on exactly what to say and do to build a case against you. The final paragraph of the letter hit me like a physical blow. Claire, I'm dying, and I know Robert will try to destroy you after I'm gone. But I've left you more than just property and money. I've left you the tools to fight back. In the safe deposit box at First National Bank, you'll find everything you need to prove Robert's lies and protect yourself. The key is taped under my jewelry box in the bedroom closet. Don't let him win, my dear. Don't let him take your life apart the way he's taken apart so many other things over the years. I folded the letter with hands that couldn't stop shaking and looked at Mrs. Henderson. Do you know anything about a safe deposit box? I drove her to the bank 3 times in her final month, Mrs. Henderson replied. She said she was securing important documents for you. She also asked me to tell you that if David doesn't believe you at first, don't give up on him. She said Robert's control over him isn't as strong as it seems, and the truth will eventually break through. I stuffed the papers back into the envelope, my mind racing. I had evidence of Robert's manipulation, proof of his lies, documentation of his hidden money. But I also had a problem. I needed to get into Margaret's house to retrieve the safe deposit box key, and Robert would never let me anywhere near the place. Mrs. Henderson, is Robert home during the day? He leaves every morning at 9:30 for his coffee with the other retired men at the diner. Usually doesn't come back until noon. But Claire, you can't just break into that house. If he catches you, I'm not breaking in, I said firmly. Margaret left me that house. Legally, I have every right to be there. But even as I said it, I knew the legal reality and the practical reality were 2 very different things. Robert would call the police if he found me in his house and in a small town where he'd lived for decades and built relationships with everyone from the mayor to the police chief. Who would they believe? The respected widower or the accused manipulator? I needed help, and I needed it from someone Robert couldn't intimidate or influence. Someone who knew the legal system and could protect me if things went wrong. Mrs. Henderson, do you know any lawyers in town who aren't friends with Robert? She thought for a moment. There's a young woman who just opened a practice last year, Jessica Morrison. She moved here from the city, doesn't know anybody, specializes in estate law. Margaret mentioned her once, said she seemed sharp and honest. I pulled out my phone and searched for Jessica Morrison's office. If I was going to war with Robert Whitmore, I needed professional ammunition. Jessica Morrison turned out to be exactly what I needed. Young, hungry, and completely unimpressed by small-town politics. When I showed her Margaret's letter and the accompanying documents, her eyes lit up like she'd just found buried treasure. This is incredible, she said, spreading the papers across her desk. I've never seen a case where someone documented their own family's manipulation attempts so thoroughly. Your mother-in-law basically handed you a roadmap to defend yourself. Can we use this to get into the house legally? Jessica nodded. If you're truly the beneficiary of the will, you have every right to access the property. I can file for an emergency court order this afternoon, but that might tip Robert off to what we're doing. The better approach might be to simply assert your rights and document everything carefully. What if he calls the police? Then we show them the will and Margaret's letter, and we make it clear that you're the legal owner acting within your rights. The key is to have witnesses and document everything with photos and video. I thought about Mrs. Henderson, about her 53 years of friendship with Margaret, about her willingness to honor a dying woman's wishes. I think I know someone who can help with that. The next morning, at exactly 9:35, Mrs. Henderson and I watched from her kitchen window as Robert's car disappeared down the street toward town. 5 minutes later, I was standing at the front door of the house I'd called home for 15 years, my hands shaking as I turned the key that Margaret had given me years ago. The house felt different now, charged with secrets and lies, instead of the warmth and love I'd always associated with it. I moved quickly through the rooms I knew so well, heading straight for Margaret's bedroom. Her jewelry box sat exactly where it always had on the antique dresser, and when I lifted it, I found the safe deposit box key taped to the bottom, just as her letter had promised. But as I stood there holding the key, I noticed something else. Margaret's bedroom had been ransacked. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered, the closet torn apart. Robert had been searching for something, and from the looks of it, he'd been searching desperately. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, her phone ready to record everything. "Oh my goodness, Claire, what happened in here?" "Robert's been looking for the same thing we're looking for," I said grimly. "He knows Margaret left me something important, and he's trying to find it before I do." I moved quickly through the rest of the house, documenting the destruction with my phone camera. Margaret's office had been similarly destroyed, papers everywhere, filing cabinets emptied, even the cushions on her reading chair sliced open. But it was in the kitchen that I found the most disturbing evidence of Robert's desperation. On the counter lay a stack of papers that made my blood run cold, fake emails printed on letterhead that looked like it came from my school, supposedly showing me discussing Margaret's confusion and susceptibility to suggestion with colleagues. The emails were dated over the past 6 months, and they painted a picture of a calculating woman systematically isolating an elderly victim. "Mrs. Henderson, are you getting this?" I asked, holding up the forged documents. "Every second," she replied, her voice shaking with anger. "That monster. How could he do something so evil?" I photographed every fake document, every forged signature, every manufactured piece of evidence Robert had created to frame me. The scope of his deception was breathtaking. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer, building an elaborate case against me while I'd been innocently caring for his dying wife. But the most shocking discovery came when I found his notebook, carelessly left open on the kitchen table. Page after page of handwritten plans. When to plant doubts in David's mind, how to make me look suspicious to other family members, which neighbors to approach with his version of events, even a timeline for when to reveal each piece of manufactured evidence. And there, on the final page I read, was a note that made my stomach drop. "Remember, if Claire gets suspicious and starts asking questions, accelerate the timeline. Better to strike first than risk exposure." I looked at Mrs. Henderson with growing alarm. He knows. Somehow, he knows I'm getting close to the truth. As if summoned by my words, the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway made us both freeze. Heavy footsteps on the front porch, a key turning in the lock. Robert was home early, and we were trapped in his house with evidence of his crimes spread across the kitchen table, holding the key to the safe deposit box that contained proof of everything Margaret had tried to warn me about. Mrs. Henderson grabbed my arm, her elderly face pale with fear. "Claire, we need to go, right now." But it was too late. The front door opened, and Robert's voice boomed through the house with a rage that made my knees weak. "I know you're in here, Claire, and when I find you, you're going to regret ever setting foot in my house again." The seconds stretched like hours as Robert's footsteps thundered through the house, getting closer to the kitchen where Mrs. Henderson and I stood frozen with his incriminating notebook spread between us. My mind raced through impossible options: run, hide, confront, or somehow disappear into thin air. But Mrs. Henderson surprised me. This 78-year-old woman who I'd always seen as fragile and sweet straightened her spine, grabbed the notebook, and shoved it into her purse with the determination of a seasoned spy. "Follow my lead," she whispered, then called out in a voice that would have made any Academy Award winner jealous, "Robert? Robert, is that you? Thank goodness you're home." His footsteps stopped abruptly. When he appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face was a mask of fury that shifted instantly to confusion at seeing Mrs. Henderson standing there like she belonged. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" "Oh, Robert, I'm so sorry to intrude," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice trembling with perfectly manufactured distress. "I was bringing Claire by to collect a few of Margaret's things. You know, some personal items Margaret had promised her, when we noticed the front door was unlocked. We were worried someone had broken in because the house looked so disturbed." Robert's eyes darted around the kitchen, taking in the scattered papers, the open drawers, the evidence of his own desperate searching. I watched his face carefully, seeing the exact moment he realized how his frantic hunt for Margaret's secrets had made him look like the guilty party. "I was looking for something," he said slowly, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "Well, of course you were, dear," Mrs. Henderson continued, patting his arm like a concerned neighbor. "Grief makes us all do strange things. Why don't you sit down and let Claire finish gathering Margaret's personal items? She'll be out of your hair in just a few minutes." The genius of Mrs. Henderson's approach hit me like lightning. She'd made Robert the one who looked suspicious, the one who needed to explain himself, while positioning me as simply fulfilling Margaret's wishes. And she'd done it so naturally that Robert couldn't object, without seeming even more unreasonable. But I could see the calculation in Robert's eyes, the way he was measuring his options, deciding how much he could get away with while Mrs. Henderson was there as a witness. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I think I have everything I need." Robert's face darkened. "What exactly did you take from my house?" "From Margaret's house," I corrected gently. "Just some photos and a few pieces of jewelry she wanted me to have. Nothing valuable." The lie came easily because it was mostly true. The safe deposit box key was small enough to hide in my palm, and Margaret's letter was tucked safely in my jacket pocket. Everything else, Robert's notebook, his forged documents, his evidence of manipulation, Mrs. Henderson had managed to collect while I distracted him. "I want to see what you took," Robert demanded, stepping closer with an aggressive stance that made Mrs. Henderson instinctively move between us. "Robert Whitmore," she said in a voice that could have frozen summer, "I am shocked at your behavior. Claire has been nothing but gracious about Margaret's passing, and here you are, treating her like a criminal in what is legally her own home." Robert's face went pale. "What do you mean, her own home?" Mrs. Henderson and I exchanged glances. This was the moment of truth, the point where we either backed down or revealed our hand completely. "Margaret left the house to Claire," Mrs. Henderson said simply, "along with most of her other assets. Didn't you know?" The color drained from Robert's face so completely that for a moment I thought he might collapse. He gripped the back of a kitchen chair, his knuckles white with tension. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Margaret would never. She wouldn't do that to her own family." "She did it to protect her family," I said quietly. "All of her family, including you." Robert's laugh was bitter and desperate. "Protect me? By giving everything to you? By leaving me with nothing after 40 years of marriage?" "She didn't leave you with nothing, Robert. She left you with the truth." I pulled Margaret's letter from my pocket, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. "She knew about the money, Robert. She knew about your father's illegal activities, about the funds you've been hiding, about the lies you've been telling for decades." Robert's face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, fear, and finally a cold anger that made my skin crawl. "You don't know what you're talking about." "She documented everything," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "The offshore accounts, the forged tax returns, the payments to people who knew your family's secrets. She even knew about the lawyer you hired to help you frame me for elder abuse." Mrs. Henderson pulled out her phone and showed Robert the photos she'd taken of his forged emails and fake documents. "She also knew about these, dear. Margaret was many things, but she wasn't stupid." Robert stared at the phone screen, and I watched 40 years of carefully constructed lies crumble in his eyes. When he looked up at me, there was something broken in his expression. something that almost made me feel sorry for him. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly. "What this will do to David, to Sarah, to this family's reputation, in this town." "What I've done?" I asked, my sympathy evaporating instantly. "Robert, you tried to destroy me. You poisoned your own son against his wife, forged documents to frame me for crimes I didn't commit, and spent months planning to ruin my life to cover up your own lies." "I was protecting my family." "You were protecting yourself," I shot back, all the pain and betrayal of the past week erupting in my voice. "You were willing to sacrifice me, to destroy my marriage, to send me to prison if necessary, all to keep your secrets buried." Robert slumped into the kitchen chair, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. The money wasn't supposed to matter. It was just supposed to be there, in the background, helping us live comfortably. Margaret wasn't supposed to find out. "But she did find out," Mrs. Henderson said gently. "And when she confronted you about it, instead of telling the truth, you decided to destroy an innocent woman." "She's not innocent," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. "She married David for his family's money. She's been planning this for years." I knelt down beside his chair, looking directly into his eyes. "Robert, I married David because I loved him. I still love him, even though you've turned him against me. I cared for Margaret because she was like a mother to me, not because I wanted anything from her. And if you hadn't been so afraid of your own secrets coming out, you would have seen that." Tears started rolling down Robert's weathered cheeks. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw not the monster who had tried to destroy me, but a scared old man who had been living with lies for so long he'd forgotten what truth looked like. "What happens now?" he asked, in a voice barely above a whisper. Before I could answer, the front door opened again, and David's voice called out, "Dad, Mrs. Henderson, I saw your cars outside and wanted to check. Claire?" My husband appeared in the kitchen doorway, and I saw the exact moment when he took in the scene. His father crying, Mrs. Henderson looking stern and protective, me kneeling on the floor with Margaret's letter in my hands, and evidence of deception scattered across the table. "What's going on here?" David asked, his voice tight with confusion and growing alarm. I stood slowly, every muscle in my body tense with the weight of this moment. Everything depended on how I handled the next few minutes. I could destroy Robert completely, reveal every secret, expose every lie. Or I could find a way to save my marriage and my family while still protecting myself. "David," I said carefully, "your father has something he needs to tell you. Something he should have told you a long time ago." Robert looked up at his son, with eyes full of shame and desperation. "David, I've made terrible mistakes. I've hurt Claire. I've lied to you, and I've dishonored your mother's memory." David moved closer, his face pale with confusion. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Robert glanced at me, then at Mrs. Henderson, then back at his son. In that moment, I realized he was asking for my permission to tell the truth, asking me to show him mercy even after everything he'd done to me. I nodded slightly, and Robert took a shaky breath. "Your grandfather wasn't the man we told you he was," Robert began. "The money that supported this family for decades, the money that paid for your education and this house and our comfortable life. It came from illegal activities. And when your mother found out, instead of dealing with it honestly, I tried to frame Claire for manipulating her." David stared at his father like he was speaking a foreign language. "Frame Claire? Dad, what are you saying?" Mrs. Henderson stepped forward and gently handed David the photos on her phone. "Your father forged emails and documents to make it look like Claire had been manipulating your mother into changing her will. He's been planning to destroy her reputation to keep his own secrets hidden." I watched my husband's face as he scrolled through image after image of his father's deception The forged emails with my name on them, the fake witness statements, the timeline of manipulation and lies that Robert had crafted so carefully. "This can't be real," David whispered. "Claire, tell me this isn't real." "I wish I could," I said softly. "But David, your mother knew this was going to happen. She left me a letter explaining everything, warning me about what your father was planning to do." I handed him Margaret's letter, and David read it with growing horror. When he finished, he looked at his father with an expression I'd never seen before, complete and utter disappointment mixed with heartbreak. "All these weeks," David said slowly, "all the things you've been telling me about Claire, about her motives, about her character, it was all lies?" Robert couldn't meet his son's eyes. "I was scared, David. I was trying to protect..." "Protect what?" David's voice rose with anger. "Protect your lies? Protect your pride? You were willing to destroy my wife to protect yourself? I thought if Claire got the inheritance, she would investigate the source of our money and expose everything. I thought if I could prove she was manipulative..." "You could what, Dad? Send her to prison? Destroy her life? Ruin her career?" David's hands were shaking with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand that I almost lost the best thing in my life because I believed your lies?" The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of Robert's quiet sobbing. David turned to me, his eyes filled with pain and regret. "Claire, I am so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have known that everything about you, everything I've loved about you for 15 years, couldn't just be an act." I wanted to run to him, to feel his arms around me, to pretend the past week had never happened. But I couldn't. Not yet. "David, I need you to understand something," I said carefully. "Your father didn't just lie to you about me. He's been lying to your whole family for decades. The money, the business success, the reputation, it's all built on crimes your grandfather committed generations ago." David looked at his father with a mixture of disgust and pity. "Is that true, Dad?" Robert nodded miserably. "The statute of limitations ran out decades ago. No one could prosecute us now. But if the truth came out, it would destroy our reputation, our standing in the community. Everything we've built here would be gone." "Everything we've built here is already gone," David said quietly. "You destroyed it the moment you decided to frame my wife for elder abuse." Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat gently. "If I may suggest something," she said, "Margaret left very specific instructions about how she wanted this situation handled. She didn't want to destroy the family or expose the secrets unnecessarily. She just wanted to protect Claire and make sure the truth was available if it was needed." "What kind of instructions?" David asked. I pulled out the safe deposit box key. "She left documentation about everything in a safe deposit box at the bank. Proof of your grandfather's activities, evidence of the money trail, but also a plan for how to handle the situation without destroying everyone in the process." Robert looked up with something like hope in his eyes. "What kind of plan?" "She wanted the illegal money returned to appropriate charities," I explained. "She wanted your father to get counseling and make amends for his recent actions. And she wanted the family to start over with honesty instead of lies." David stared at me for a long moment. "And what do you want, Claire?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for days. What did I want? Justice, revenge, an apology, my old life back. "I want my family back," I said simply. "Not the family built on lies and secrets, but a real family built on truth and trust. I want to know that if we have children, they'll grow up knowing who they really are instead of living with shame about their heritage." David's eyes filled with tears. "Can you forgive me? Can you forgive us?" I looked around the kitchen, at Robert, broken and ashamed, but finally honest. At Mrs. Henderson, who had risked herself to help a neighbor. At David, who had been manipulated but was now willing to face the truth. at the house that held 15 years of memories and would now hold 15 more years of different ones. I can forgive, I said. But things have to change, really change. No more secrets, no more lies, no more manipulation. If we're going to rebuild this family, we're going to do it right. Robert stood up slowly, looking older than his years, but somehow lighter, as if telling the truth had lifted a weight he'd been carrying for decades. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said. "I'll return the money, I'll get help, I'll make amends to you and to everyone I've hurt. I just want my family back too." David reached for my hand, and this time I let him take it. His fingers were warm and familiar, but also different somehow, marked by everything we'd been through. "What about the inheritance?" he asked. "The house, the assets Margaret left you." I thought about Margaret's letter, about her careful plans, about her love for all of us, even in the face of such dysfunction. "The house belongs to all of us," I said. "It always has. The money will go where Margaret wanted it to go. Some to charity, some to help our family start over honestly, and some to make sure that if Robert needs care as he gets older, he'll have it." Mrs. Henderson smiled for the first time since we'd entered the house. "Margaret would be so proud of you, dear. This is exactly what she hoped would happen." 6 months later, I was standing in the same kitchen, but everything was different. The walls had been repainted, the old secrets cleared out along with the outdated furniture. Robert lived in a small apartment in town now, attending therapy twice a week and volunteering at a charity that helped elderly people avoid financial abuse. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. David and I had gone to counseling too, learning how to rebuild trust, how to communicate honestly, how to create a marriage based on reality instead of the fantasy we'd been living. It hadn't been easy. There were nights when the betrayal felt too deep to heal, days when the hurt seemed insurmountable. But we'd made it through because we'd finally learned the difference between love that asks you to ignore red flags and love that helps you face uncomfortable truths. Sarah came for dinner every Sunday now, bringing her children to play in the backyard where Margaret had once tended her garden. She'd struggled the most with learning about her family's secrets, but she'd also been the one most relieved to finally understand why her family had always felt slightly off balance. The money from Robert's father had been donated to organizations that fought financial crimes with Robert's full cooperation and public acknowledgement. It had been front-page news for 3 weeks, and the gossip had been brutal. But we'd survived it together, and somehow that had made us stronger. Mrs. Henderson still lived next door, still kept Margaret's secrets when asked, but now she also served as our family's unofficial truth teller, the person who made sure we stayed honest with each other, even when it was difficult. And in the safe deposit box, along with all of Margaret's documentation about the family's financial history, I'd found one final letter addressed to me, dated just days before she died. "Dear Claire," it read, "if you're reading this, then you survived Robert's attempts to destroy you, and my family is finally free from the lies that have poisoned us for generations. I want you to know that I chose you as my inheritor, not because David didn't deserve everything, but because I knew you were the only one strong enough to save us all. Thank you for loving my son, for caring for me, and for having the courage to fight for the truth, even when it would have been easier to walk away. The greatest inheritance I can leave is not money or property, but the knowledge that love and honesty can overcome even the deepest deceptions. Use this gift wisely and remember that families aren't just born, they're built one truthful conversation at a time." As I folded the letter and put it back in its safe place, David came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Any regrets?" he asked, the question he'd been asking every day for months. I leaned back against his chest and looked out the kitchen window at the garden where Margaret's roses were blooming again after a long, hard winter. "None," I said, and For the first time in 15 years of marriage, I knew it was completely true.